The stars whispered secrets of ancient civilizations, of empires that had risen and fallen long before the first human ever gazed up at the night sky. Across the galactic expanse, 1,000 species thrived, each with their own history, their own wars, and their own myths. Among them, one legend stood apart, a story passed down through the generations, whispered in darkened chambers and half-forgotten libraries. The humans. A race so destructive, so unrelenting in their conquests, that the elder species had purged all records of their existence. Some claimed they had wiped themselves out in an apocalyptic war. Others believed they had fled beyond the known galaxies, vanishing into the void. And yet, their memory remained, a ghostly warning of what unchecked ambition could unleash. For centuries, the stories faded into obscurity. The great empires dismissed them as mere fables, cautionary tales to frighten fledgling civilizations. After all, if such creatures had ever existed, they were long gone. Until the day the fleet arrived. The dominion of Vral had ruled uncontested for thousands of years. Their empire spanned hundreds of systems, their fleets unmatched, their technology centuries ahead of their rivals. When their deep space sensors picked up an anomaly on the fringes of their territory, they assumed it was some lost colony ship or a band of pirates foolish enough to test their might. They sent a single dreadnought, expecting a swift extermination. The crew of the Vrakash laughed when they saw the primitive vessels, ships of crude metal, shaped by brutal efficiency rather than elegance. They were old, relics of a forgotten era, their hulls scarred from countless battles. The Vryle hailed them with the arrogance of a species that had never known fear. The response came in a language the Dominion had long erased from their archives. "We are humanity. Surrender or be destroyed." The admiral of the Vrakash sneered. It was impossible. The humans were myths, extinct. Yet, as his sensors analyzed the approaching fleet, an uneasy feeling coiled in his gut. These ships, old as they were, moved with precision, their weapons charged, their formations flawless. He dismissed the fear. The Vral had crushed countless foes before. With a single command, he ordered the annihilation of the human fleet. That was his last mistake. The human ships accelerated, faster than they had any right to. They weaved through incoming fire like wraiths, dodging plasma blasts with eerie precision. Their weapons, outdated by Dominion standards, should have been laughably ineffective, but they weren't. The first Vral ship went dark in seconds, its shields overloaded by a barrage of kinetic slugs. Another erupted in flames as a missile, ancient yet devastating, pierced its core. The dreadnought, the pride of the Dominion fleet, barely had time to send a distress signal before its bridge was torn apart by railgun fire. The battle lasted less than an hour. The humans didn't lose a single ship. Word spread like wildfire. The impossible had happened. The myths were real. The monsters had returned. And they were coming. The Dominion scrambled, sending more ships, larger fleets, entire armadas. It didn't matter. The humans fought like demons, with a brutality and cunning that defied logic. They used tactics the Dominion had never encountered, strategies born from a history of war unlike any other. They didn't seek diplomacy. They didn't ask for terms. They wanted revenge, for crimes forgotten by time, for the sins of the past, for the galaxy that had once tried to erase them. And so, as the stars burned and entire worlds trembled in fear, one message echoed across the cosmos, carried by the wreckage of every Dominion fleet that dared to stand against them. Humanity has returned. The Dominion of Vral, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, now found themselves gripped by an unfamiliar and terrifying sensation. Fear. Reports poured in from every corner of their empire, each one worse than the last. Entire fleets had been wiped out, colonies reduced to ashes, and their once unchallenged dominion was crumbling under the relentless onslaught of an enemy they had long dismissed as a myth. At the heart of the dominion, Supreme Chancellor Vakos stood in his grand war chamber, surrounded by his highest-ranking commanders. Holograms flickered before them, each displaying the same grim reality. Human warships striking like phantoms, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. "This is impossible," Admiral Toranek muttered, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "These creatures are relics of the past. Their technology is ancient, their ships crude. How are they winning?" Vakos turned to his intelligence officer, a pale-skinned Vraal named Savelin, whose trembling hands betrayed her fear. "What do we know about them?" he demanded. Savelin hesitated. "Not much. All records of the humans were purged long ago. What little remains suggests that they were resilient, warlike. But this?" She gestured at the destruction before them. "This is beyond anything we could have imagined." "Perhaps they were never truly gone," another general murmured. "Perhaps they have been waiting, watching, preparing for this very moment." The words sent a chill through the room. The idea that humanity had not vanished but had instead been lurking in the void, building their strength, was more terrifying than any war machine. "Enough speculation," Vakos snapped. "How do we stop them?" Silence, because no one had an answer. The war was unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. They had fought countless enemies before, rebellious planets, rival empires, pirate factions, but those foes had played by the same rules, following the same unspoken laws of engagement. The humans did not. They fought without honor, striking without warning. They refused to negotiate, refused to acknowledge surrender. They targeted the Dominion's supply lines, their shipyards, their fuel reserves. They were waging total war, something the Dominion had never encountered. And worst of all, they seemed to be getting stronger. The first human fleet had been small, but new warships were appearing every day. Where were they coming from? How had they built so many ships in secret? The Dominion's spies had no answers, and that only deepened the terror. And then, humanity did something truly horrifying. They took their first planet. The Dominion had assumed that humans were nothing more than raiders, striking quickly before vanishing. But when the industrial world of Chorus 9 fell, it became clear. Humanity wasn't just here for revenge. They were here to conquer. Survivors from the planet told stories of human soldiers unlike any the Dominion had seen. They fought in exosuits, moved like shadows, and never left a single Dominion soldier alive. The cities of Chorus 9 burned for weeks, and when the fires died, the human flag was raised over the ruins. A new empire was rising, and the galaxy would never be the same. Panic spread like wildfire through the Dominion. Chorus 9 was the first world to fall, but it would not be the last. Reports flooded in. Human fleets were striking deep into Dominion space, taking planets with terrifying efficiency. Worlds that had stood under the Dominion's rule for centuries now burned with human fire. Supreme Chancellor Vakos could no longer afford to ignore the truth. Humanity wasn't just winning, they were dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. He called for an emergency meeting of the High Council, a gathering of the most powerful beings in the Empire. The council chamber, usually a place of control and order, was now filled with fear and desperation. "We must deploy our Omega-class warships," Admiral Toranek argued. "Their fleet is powerful, but they cannot match the raw might of our capital ships." "We've already sent Omega-class ships," Sevelin countered, her voice trembling. "They were destroyed." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the room. "How?" Vakos growled. Sevelin took a deep breath. "We've underestimated them. Their ships may be old, But their technology has evolved in ways we never anticipated. Their weapons bypass our shielding systems. Their tactics are unlike anything we've faced. "What do they want?" one of the council members demanded. Svalin hesitated before responding. "Vengeance." Silence. Then the room erupted in shouts. "This is madness! We are the Dominion!" "Negotiate with them. Surely they can be reasoned with." "No, they will not stop until we are extinct." Vakos raised a hand, silencing them. His reptilian eyes gleamed with fury. "If it is vengeance they seek, then we will show them why the Dominion has ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years. We will burn their worlds, hunt them to the last soldier." But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. He knew the truth. The Dominion had always won because they had always been stronger. But for the first time, they were facing an enemy that was not afraid. For humanity, this war was not about conquest or power. It was something deeper, something more terrifying. It was personal. And deep in the void, beyond the reaches of known space, a new fleet was assembling. Humanity had returned. And they were just getting started. The Dominion's war machine roared to life. Across the Empire, shipyards worked without rest, churning out warships faster than ever before. Recruitment centers overflowed as soldiers were pressed into service, their minds filled with propaganda about the Terran invaders. The Dominion had faced rebellions, rogue fleets, and rival empires before, but never an enemy like this. And still, the humans advanced. The war was not fought on even terms. The Dominion believed in control, in discipline, in strategies that had worked for millennia. The humans fought with chaos, with unpredictability, with an unrelenting brutality that shattered every doctrine the Dominion had built its empire upon. A single human fleet could appear out of nowhere, hit a supply convoy, and disappear before the Dominion even had time to react. Their ships were not just fast, they moved like predators, striking vital targets with precision. They didn't waste time in drawn-out engagements. They struck where it hurt the most. And then came the ground war. When the Dominion lost Chorus 9, they assumed it was an anomaly. When they lost Kethros 6 and Draenor Prime in the same week, they realized it was a pattern. Human soldiers were unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. The Vra'al, like many species in the galaxy, relied on advanced drones and automated warfare to minimize their own casualties. Their soldiers were commanders, guiding machines to fight on their behalf. But humans? They were different. They fought in the mud, in the ruins, in the streets. They didn't rely on machines to fight for them. They were the weapons. Dominion troops, accustomed to clean, calculated warfare, were horrified. Human soldiers did not break when outnumbered. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought with an intensity that defied reason, with tactics that made no sense, until they worked. The worst were the Terran shock troopers. They didn't just kill Dominion soldiers, they hunted them. They adapted, learned, and exploited weaknesses faster than any enemy the Dominion had faced. A single Dominion battalion could be wiped out in a night by a handful of human operatives. Their weapons, primitive by Dominion standards, fired kinetic projectiles that tore through armor like paper. They fought without mercy, and that terrified the Dominion more than anything. The humans weren't just conquering planets, they were taking them back. The Dominion's leadership scrambled to understand why. They were the dominant force in the galaxy. They had ruled unchallenged for centuries. What had they done to deserve this war? Then they found the truth. Deep in the restricted archives of the Dominion, buried under centuries of classified information, Supreme Chancellor Vakos uncovered a dark secret. The humans had not vanished from history. They had been erased. Long ago, before the Dominion had risen to power, their ancestors had encountered humanity. A young, ambitious race, expanding rapidly, forging alliances, and mastering warfare faster than any species before them. They were a threat, not because they were evil, but because they were relentless. And so the Dominion's forebears had made a decision. They had committed genocide. They had exterminated entire human worlds, burned colonies to the ground, and wiped every record of their existence. They had hunted the survivors to the edges of the galaxy, believing they had destroyed them all. But they hadn't. Somehow, humanity had survived. And now, after centuries in the shadows, they had returned. Not as conquerors, but as executioners. The realization struck Supreme Chancellor Vakos like a death knell. The war wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. The humans weren't here to expand, to conquer, or to dominate. They were here to settle an ancient debt, one written in blood and fire, one that the Dominion had forgotten, but humanity had never forgiven. Vakos stood in the silent chamber, staring at the ancient records, at the holovids of burning human cities, at the cold, calculated extermination of an entire species. The faces of the Vral leaders from centuries past looked down at him, their decisions sealing the fate of their descendants. The humans had every right to hate them. And yet, hate wasn't the word for what the humans felt. Hate was emotional. Hate could be reasoned with. This was something else. This was retribution. A sudden chime broke the heavy silence. An emergency transmission flickered to life in the war chamber. The face of Admiral Toranek appeared, his expression a mask of disbelief and barely restrained panic. "They're here," he said, voice hollow. Vakos straightened. "Where?" Toranek swallowed. "Here, on Vraal Prime." A hush fell over the room. Impossible. The humans were still on the outer colonies. They shouldn't have been able to reach the Dominion's capital so quickly. But they had. A second alarm blared. Tactical maps filled the war chamber, showing red markers descending from the void, like vengeful wraiths. Human warships, larger and deadlier than the Dominion had anticipated, had bypassed the outer defenses completely. They weren't here to fight another battle. They were here to end the war. The skies over Vraal Prime turned to fire as the first human dropships descended through the atmosphere. Anti-air defenses roared to life, but it was already too late. The humans had planned this assault with the precision of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. Stealthcraft had already infiltrated the planet's orbital stations, taking control of defense platforms and turning them against their own fleet. Dominion warships were exploding in low orbit, raining molten debris onto their own cities. On the ground, panic erupted. Citizens flooded the streets, watching in horror as their once invincible empire collapsed before their eyes. The Dominion's own soldiers, those who had been raised to believe in their species' superiority, now trembled as human strike teams emerged from the smoke. They fought like demons. The Dominion had never seen warfare like this. Relentless, brutal, efficient. Humans didn't waste time with theatrics. They struck vital infrastructure first, crippling power grids, communications, and military coordination. Within hours, entire districts were plunged into darkness. Vakos stood in his war room, watching the nightmare unfold. His admirals screamed at one another, issuing desperate, conflicting orders. It didn't matter. The Dominion was losing. No, humanity had already won. He had one last option. "Prepare the planetary annihilation protocol," he said, his voice calm. The room froze. Even his most loyal generals recoiled. "Chancellor," Savalan whispered, "that will kill billions, our own people." "If we cannot have this world, neither will they," Vakos said coldly. But before the order could be given, the doors to the war chamber burst open. A figure stepped inside, flanked by two human soldiers clad in jet-black armor. Vakos recognized him instantly. He had seen the man's face before. Not in person, but in the old, buried archives. One of the last survivors. A descendant of the massacred race. A human. The man walked forward, his helmet under one arm, his eyes filled with something worse than hatred. Certainty. Vakos clenched his jaw. "What do you want?" The human smiled. "Justice." Outside, the Dominion burned. Vrael Prime fell in a single night. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled the galaxy with an iron grip, its fleets unmatched, its power unquestioned. But in the end, none of that mattered. Humanity had not come as conquerors or diplomats. They had come as executioners, delivering a long-overdue sentence. The war did not end with negotiations or peace treaties. It ended with silence. By dawn, the Dominion's high command was gone. Supreme Chancellor Vakos, his admirals, his war ministers, all executed. The humans did not spare them, did not offer mercy, did not waste words. The judgment had been passed centuries ago. This was merely the sentence being carried out. The streets of Vrael Prime were eerily quiet after the final battle. The towering spires of the Dominion's once great capital stood in ruin, smoke rising from shattered buildings. The banners of the Vrael, once a symbol of power, lay trampled in the dirt. And over the tallest tower, the flag of humanity flew. Across the galaxy, every Dominion-controlled planet received the same transmission. A human commander stood before the camera, clad in dark, battle-worn armor. His face was calm, his voice steady. There was no joy in his words, only finality. "The Dominion is no more," he said. "Your leaders are dead, your fleets are gone, your empire has fallen." A heavy pause. "For centuries you ruled through fear. You erased our history, you tried to erase us, and yet here we stand." He leaned forward, his gaze burning into the lens. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. But we do understand justice. The screen flickered, showing images of surrendered Dominion soldiers being led away in chains. The humans had not wiped them out, not completely. Those who had not resisted, those who had no hand in the genocide, would be spared. But they would never rule again. "We do not seek to replace you," the commander continued. "We are not here to build an empire. We have reclaimed what was stolen from us, nothing more. The galaxy is free from Dominion tyranny. What happens next is up to you." The transmission ended, and with it, an era. The Dominion's collapse sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Worlds that had been under its rule for centuries found themselves free for the first time. Some rejoiced, others fell into chaos. Rival species scrambled to fill the power vacuum, but none dared to challenge the humans. Because now, the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity had survived extinction.